With that, I would like to introduce our longtime friend of the League, David McCuan. Dr. McCuan joined the faculty at Sonoma State in fall of 2003. His expertise rests in two broad areas: American politics and international relations. He received his doctorate from UC Riverside in 2002. In 2009 to 2010, Dr. McCuan was a Fulbright teaching scholar in the Department of International and European Studies in the Czech Republic. Professor McCuan's multiple media appearances providing analysis of campaign dynamics and election results include international, national, regional, and local media outlets, and they are too long to mention, but I will mention the New York Times, CNN, ABC News, MSNBC, Fox, Bloomberg News, Time Magazine. Like I said, there's too long to mention, but with that, we are fortunate to have Dr. McCuan here today to speak about what's ahead for Sonoma County in the current political climate. Please join me in welcoming Dr. McCuan.
Well, Karen, thank you very much for that nice introduction. It is so great to see so many friends here for the League. As you know, I'm a huge, huge fan of the work that you do and partnering with you over the years in these difficult times, but also in terms of voter education and outreach. So to be here to participate in your fall kickoff is something that I'm just thrilled to do. And again, it's nice to see so many of you. Let me share my screen. If someone could just let me know that the screen is shared and things work. Hold on just for a second. I think it just popped out here for a second. Hold on. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. All right. You all should be able to see that.
Yes, we can, David. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. So as we kick off for this fall, I wanted to put together a couple of ideas for you, thinking about how to monitor what's happening nationally and its impact here locally for Sonoma County. I called this Vigilant Guideposts, try to combine some different thoughts and different ideas and talks in terms of thinking about where we're headed and what's going on. So I'm going to concentrate on a couple of different factors. As you may guess, we're going to go about 35 minutes, leave plenty of time for Q&A. You can always follow up and send an email, good, bad, or ugly. I would always respond to you and look forward to that. And as Karen mentioned, this is also recorded, so we can follow up as needed as well. Happy to send you the presentation if that's what you needed, or you can also get it from our friends here at the League. So with that kind of setup, what I wanted to do was concentrate on various vigilant goalposts, guideposts, different vigilant ideas to think about what is happening for our politics headed to the midterms and into the presidential election, especially in these very tough times in American politics, concentrating on the period after the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, what was known as H.R. 1. As all of you know, you're here today, this afternoon, American electoral politics and American democracy are in a really stressful place, under great stress at some level. And what do we note moving forward? What do we pay attention to? Because sometimes, look, frankly, politics and political science can just be depressing. And so we need to put a spin on it, think about it in proactive ways that empower us. And so that's the goal of today's talk. It will be dense. There will be some components of this that are troubling for all of us, and all of you giving your attention to these matters may be troubled about where we're headed. But there are ways to navigate this and things to pay attention to moving forward. And that's really the goal of today's talk. So you might think back to 2024, and there were kind of 12 key questions that were animating that election. There was the election itself, where parties are at, the economy, future foreign policy, national security relations, the culture wars, what was happening down ballot, and what was happening, within Senate and House elections, but also within states. And all of these 12 issues, and you might even have more issues beyond this, all of these 12 issues have something in common. And that is that if you look at our politics today, you look at our politics in the recent past and where we're headed, is that we have a politics that's optimized for outrage. It's a politics that's optimized to drive us in this kind of what we call an emotive quotient, or EQ, an emotional space driven by a digital revolution that has both benefits and costs. And we've talked about this before in the league. The league has paid attention to this statewide, regionally, since we're in the Bay Area, as well as nationally, in terms of what is happening with the process or administration of elections and our politics, and this priming effect that takes place along an emotional component of outrage. And this really is driven by this digital revolution or stressor that's punctuated with both upside and downside. So we often pay attention to this digital revolution, right? And when we look at this, there's a lot of things. And if you think about your lifetime and how things have changed, new voices are heard. We have more efficient operations, greater productivity, a lot greater access to knowledge, which is something I hope comes out of today's talk, for where you can get information.
Here's Alan. Yeah, sir. Okay.
In addition, it's also lowered costs at some level. It's made information more accessible. These are all kind of the positives here of this politics that's primed for outrage and in terms of access. But there's also this growing kind of negative externalities that we often focus on, right? The spread of misinformation, or the monetizing of outrage, particularly in a podcast universe, displacement effects, young people that I see at the university who are depressed or addicted to their phones or worried about elements, the destabilization of markets. There's these negative externalities which we often concentrate on and are problematic to navigate. Since the election, we've learned, for example, kind of diving into this, what's happened to young men. So if we look at young men who are 18 to 30, we see that tools and apps like Discord, that's on the left there, or Roblox, or Steam, a gaming platform, has a set of tools that promote this outrage and promote this kind of emotive context, this emotive quotient that punctuates politics in a negative. We have seen this before the tragic killing of Charlie Kirk. We've seen it prior to the election, but it is accelerating as well. These three platforms in particular are driving the outrage of young people and changing their politics, changing how they view politics. And they swing from extremes, whether those extremes are to Bernie Sanders or those extremes are to the far right, and they don't have a real moderating influence in their attitudes. So making particularly young men more aware of what's going on through these platforms of Discord, or through the gaming community, or through video games communities that are punctuated here, is an important element of extreme attitudes and having a big displacement effect in our politics. The Trump presidency, the Trump candidacy was able to leverage this. They've continued to leverage this. And Democrats have had some difficulty thinking about what comes next. But if you look at the next generation of what's happening in our politics, it's primed for this outrage and this disconnected component, and this kind of extremism of politics and lurching kind of to and fro. And that's really punctuating part of the social aspect of our politics, setting aside much public policy debate, a lot of policy action that is not geared to consensus. It's not geared to kind of coming together. It's geared to kind of division, and it's leaving out a generation of individuals, particularly those younger individuals that we see in college today. And there's a long tradition of this. Right? There's a long tradition of, like, these are the nattering nabobs of negativism that we talked about in the Nixon era about the press. But this whole idea of we're at this place of doomsday and doomsayers, and where doomsayers are it's the end of days, and this whole idea that we've never seen this before. And this has punctuated our elections for a long, long time in terms of like an industry that we often refer to or hear about, called the doom loop that goes on. And the idea is to move past this, to look at some ideas that can help us understand how to get out of this and where things are going, even though we don't have indicators yet of how this might be impacting directly Sonoma County. But what things would we pay attention to? What components, what variables, what indicators would we stay vigilant about to monitor the effects of our politics, particularly as we're primed for this component of outrage? And we have in the past paid attention to things more recently, like artificial intelligence. These are AI images that I generated using some AI tools. One on the left, that's of shredded ballots that I generated on my phone, and then someone tossing out shredded ballots or tossing out ballots themselves there in the middle, and creating a capital with a flag at half staff, all through the process of artificial intelligence. We've talked about this at various events and forums. And as you know, artificial intelligence is a component of this politics that's primed for outrage, this stressor. And so paying attention to AI as a component of this, of manufacturing debate and manufacturing stress, if you will, is also something to keep in mind today. So that means that the league and the work that you've done, again, across platforms and across membership sizes of the league, have often paid attention to things like polarization and misinformation and extremism. And we could do a talk just about one or all of these elements, because, for example, when we're talking about misinformation, we also have to think about disinformation and how that is different, and how malinformation also punctuates our policy and politics space. So it's not just polarization and extremism, it is looking at polarization and that division and what it does. And then in addition to that, looking at elements of extremism and how extreme behavior becomes quote unquote normal and can be managed by misinformation or disinformation or malinformation, and how those three components of mis, dis, and mal also can punctuate our politics. And these are all like concerns that we have going on that are often problematic for our politics, and having a learned space, whether we're debating what happens in an office or what happens in local government, the future of something like the Sonoma Developmental Center, something like the future of what it looks like in terms of immigration or healthcare in Sonoma County, or what's happening within district elections. All of these things primed by these key stressors that affect the quality of our democracy. And more recently, we've had this punctuated by troops in the streets, whether that's in Washington, D.C. or in Los Angeles. We've had this blending of art, society, and culture, most recently with Jimmy Kimmel being removed by Disney, or the lack of comedy, COMITY, the lack of coming together and seeing common elements that can promote legislation that often disappear, especially as we head to example for whether or not the government is going to shut down, or what things look like moving forward. All of this placed in the context of this big, beautiful bill, this act that was passed, H.R. 1, earlier this summer. That particular piece of legislation is going to be remarkable in terms of its impact moving forward, especially in a few key areas. And it's focusing within this environment of difficulty, this division, of what we can pay attention to, what we can remain vigilant to moving forward. So if we look at the budget lab, the Yale Budget Lab, we see that the one big beautiful bill does some things down the road, but paying attention to dates. So interest costs higher for consumers and businesses in 2030. Notice that's after the midterms of 2026, after what happens in the presidential election of 2028, and then moving forward. So there's some lingering or later effects. And one of the elements of this talk is to provide you some tools of what to pay attention to down the road, and what happens later, whether that's a year from now, 2 years from now, or longer, that you can go to monitor some of these things. So if you're not familiar with the Yale Budget Lab, it is very helpful in terms of its analysis, in terms of what it is doing, and analyzing elements that can affect our local economy, our state economies, and certainly what's happening nationally. For example, if you look at the Energy Innovation think tank, they analyzed elements of the big beautiful bill and how it changes domestic jobs. and how it might change, for example, electricity generation. I just put both of these up here to give you an idea of where we can get information. And you look at this on the left and you say, okay, here's the change in jobs that come out of the big, beautiful bill that drive a lot of the conclusions that you might find at the budget lab. And when you look at this, you say, wow, that other category is pretty large. What's in the other category? And in the other category are jobs that are like retail or on the nonprofit side. And the reason I picked this, and that's important, is you may not know this, but there are over 3,000 nonprofits in Sonoma County. About a third of those, more or less, are involved in faith-based organizations, churches and faith-based organizations that provide access for as nonprofits to, for example, food, those that are food insecure, those that are experiencing homelessness. As a result, when we look at this, we see that there's this space for what we often call the third sector, the nonprofit sector, which is particularly acute and important, not just in Sonoma County, but in the North Coast. Because while Sonoma County may have around 3,000 nonprofits, there are more than 1,000 nonprofits north of Sonoma County to the Oregon border. So in our broader region, what nonprofits are doing is here to stay and likely to grow while facing the stress of what's happening and what's going to happen as a result of this big, beautiful bill. On the right side, I just tried to give you an idea of some of the impacts on electricity generation, and there's an important element of this I want you to think about that isn't in here. And it shows what's the impact, for example, on wind, solar, battery, and gas in the near term and then longer. But what's not included in here are the operation of data centers and the central component of the growth of data centers in California, outside of California, on the North Coast, outside of our region as well, that can impact this delivery of power and the demand for electricity that is expected to grow exponentially in the near term and moving forward. So there are things we have in our models, but again, as I teach my students, what's important to understand is what's not in the model, those things that we miss by, or the error rate, or that which is extra or not accounted for. And one element of this moving forward is the demand on energy that's going to be driven by data centers that are going to have to come out of the standard municipal framework of generating electricity to run those data centers, meaning PG&E is not going to be able to provide enough energy for that. That will have a downstream impact on us as well. So just to set out some kind of context of what's happening with the broader components here. And then as we dive into the big, beautiful bill, I want to draw your attention, particularly given this forum and our members, of the impact of the big, beautiful bill on healthcare. I spend a little less time on immigration here, but a lot more on healthcare. And the reason I want to focus on healthcare is if you look at the big, beautiful bill and you see what happens if you are older and poor, there are some real difficulties ahead for those segments of the population. So on the left, for example, we look at increased healthcare costs for Medicare enrollees and what that looks like. So those that a couple, for example, that might be eligible but unable to access a Medicare beneficiary program, or as opposed to a couple, an individual. And what I did is you should be able in the talk to go to these graphics and click on them and open a URL where you can get the data as well. So I want to make sure that you're able to get the data. And that while we look at one example of the big, beautiful bill around healthcare, it's also framed not just by access to healthcare, but by income. And as you can see, that the reconciliation bill from the Penn budget model, not from the Yale Budget Lab, but from the Penn budget model, is what happens to those that experience income additions or subtractions based upon the big, beautiful bill. Obviously, a lot of attention was paid to millionaires and zillionaires, that fifth quintile of what happens. But I wanted to give you kind of a breakdown of those folks that will benefit and those who will benefit most. So as you kind of pay attention to healthcare and you interact that with income as an impact, and you think about this locally, there's some additional guideposts. So we can or should be able to measure the impact in California about those individuals by age and by income for what will happen to their access to medical care, to health care moving forward. And California historically has had a pretty important role in terms of mediating that impact between access and affordability and who those individuals are. We've done that for immigrants, we've done that for the indigent, and we've done that for those that are in between or around these populations as well. And if you look at the big beautiful bill, there are other aspects that were covered, right? You look at things like what happens for farms, and I gave you that at the top left here for the impact on agriculture, which is important in California, important in Sonoma County, but also important nationally. And when you look at the impact of the big beautiful bill, not just on healthcare, not just on those who are working and those who are unable to work,
66 people, mind you.
but you look at this and you say, wow, look at that safety net for agriculture. And those programs, ARC, PLC, DMC that you see there, are crop management and disaster-related programs for the management of agricultural markets, like DMC is the dairy market, for example. Agricultural relief or crop losses that might occur. So it's a safety net created that is supposed to, provide between around $60 billion for agriculture. A lot less devoted, for example, to disaster assistance or energy, and still while providing a base in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act for supporting farms moving forward, but a cut there as well based upon what we see moving forward for estimated costs. So you have on one hand a loss of healthcare access, you have this problem of who receive tax benefits, and then you have this issue of what to do about particular industries, like for example, American agriculture. And as you move forward on this bill and start to dive in and start to look at guideposts for Sonoma County, some additional things pop up. Local economies are going to be hurt a lot in terms of their social programs by this One Big Beautiful Bill. We can do this over time, we can do this by area, but you start to see, for example, a lot of elements of what can happen both moving up in terms of medical care transfers by congressional district and government public assistance and what this looks like across the country. You see some decline. Part of that is related to population decline. And so some of these local economies that go in the negative or to the left, if you want to think of it on the red scale, versus those that increase on the right. And you look at this and you start to say, wow, there's a lot of variance in terms of affected communities. And I just want to draw your attention to what happens on the left coast, west coast, in terms of how impacts on Medicaid are going to be dramatic in states like California and in places like the North Coast and Sonoma County writ large. And we'll kind of dive into this here for a moment. All right, so there are three important elements to note here in California and in Sonoma County related to the big beautiful bill. One of these is the tax credit for Obamacare. The Affordable Care Act is going away. So that raises a few questions for us. One is, what is the average tax credit in California and why is it volatile? And what is the average tax credit in Sonoma County and why is that even more volatile? All of these have elements that are driven by state factors and county factors that affect access to healthcare, a huge component of the big beautiful bill. And here's where you can find this. As you can see at the bottom, this is from the LAO, the Legislative Analyst's Office, which did a study of the major impacts of H.R. 1 on California and what happens moving forward. You can click on this and you can access this, but this particular table shows you the premium tax credits that expire under Covered California in 27 and 28. So as we move into a place headed to the presidential election in 2028, as we move into the post-midterm election period of 2026, those that are subject to coverage under Covered California are going to lose a lot of healthcare coverage, while there are additional revenue and payment limits that occur in the year after, particularly in 2028 in January and October 2028. But I just want to draw your attention to this. So what that means is coverage is going to lapse, and coverage is going to lapse amongst those that are most vulnerable. Those are younger populations, particularly 18 to 64, but also those 65 and older as well. Here is what that looks like. I put this in there just to kind of give you pause here in the middle of the day in your lunch hour. But this is an example of what is used in Sacramento, applied to counties in terms of benchmark plans for coverage and payment in California and by county. As you know, we have a lot of counties in California. A lot of them have differences in terms of their average net income and their eligibility, what it costs to live in those counties. You might think of this as general assistance for the most vulnerable in our society, functions at a different rate. The point is to not bore you with this, but just to show you the density of analysis. And as you look at what is happening here, you also see that there's a official premium of what happens that's around $2,000 annually that can be paid. That $2,000 roughly is going to become less over time in covered California beginning in that 27-28 period. So while healthcare costs rise dramatically and coverage under covered California declines, the eligibility index in those that are affected and would be covered is going to increase dramatically. And here's what that looks like, all right? You can see what happens by income level for what we expect to see with monthly net or with premiums per person based on your income level. It's the percentages that we're interested in here. So those that are making less than $30,000 are going to have a huge percentage, almost 100% increase in their monthly premium. And they don't have a lot of eligibility and variety and capability to pay that difference. And then you can see how that rises based on income. The idea being that obviously those making over $90,000 can absorb that $354 more. But notice the percentages of what happens here for net monthly premiums without this extension. This extension to pay this difference would have to be carried by the California budget. And so far, the legislature, the governor have been unwilling to do this and are worried about this moving downstream. There's a number of reasons for this, but these net premiums are going to have a dramatic impact within Sonoma County as well. What that means overall is you're looking at about 14 million more people nationwide who will be uninsured due to this budget reconciliation law and the big beautiful bill and the expiration of these enhanced tax credits under the ACA. Try to give you an idea here from Kaiser Family Foundation about what that looks like in terms of percentage increase. And it's not that California is the deepest blue here like we see in Kentucky or Louisiana or Arkansas, but that the number of people in California is dramatic. And the California budget has difficulty making this up for those that will be lost as an uninsured population. Part of this is a Republican plan to get rid of Obamacare and to reduce these subsidies, but also to place the emphasis on the states to make up that difference. And that gets really, really difficult to do because of the size, density of the California population. So let's look at this for a second. And I'm going to show you a place where you can go to look at this in almost real time. This is the expiration of these enhanced tax credits and what it would do, because this emphasis of a healthcare firm is not that it will be, 14 million, but that it will be 25%, 30% higher than that. It'll be 18 million Americans who are uninsured. So if you bear with me just for a second, I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to show you this here just for a moment. Hold on just a second. I want to run this through with you in real time. All right, here we go. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Avalair Health, which I put in the slideshow, and you can run. It looks like what the expiration of these enhanced tax credits would look like, and its impact. And what it allows you to do is to cut this by various demographics. I'm going to run down the page here to show you what happens. You can select an age group, okay? You can look at those that are, notice 18 to 64, 50 to 64. You can navigate to a state. There is mixed data for states like Alaska and Minnesota. And you can go into California, and then from California, you can navigate into various counties moving forward. They haven't set this up for all 58 California counties yet, but what you do see is a breakdown of individuals by year. So we can see, for example, over time that 51,000 individuals with incomes below the FPL, the federal poverty limit, will lose their insurance in California. So roughly 1,000 per county. There's going to be a lot of variance there, just giving you an average. And what that looks like for those that are between 150 and 400%. Gives you a breakdown by race and ethnicity. Not a lot of surprises there. But what will happen is just in 1 year, that the savings that could be had by enrolling them, as you can see, the premium savings, if California were to backfill this, would be over $600 a year. And the reason that this website is very valuable is not just who's affected and by their income or race, or what will happen in specific counties over time and by age, but it also gives us an idea that if we could insure these individuals at some level, we can save money over time, even though this has been not backfilled by the state as of this moment. And this is very difficult in this time because obviously a mediating issue is here is that if you look at race or ethnicity, especially amongst Hispanic or Latino in the state who might be subject to more immigration scrutiny, this places a real difficult place for politicians to go into that space to increase health insurance for those populations that may be undocumented. But nonetheless, this website becomes really helpful as a place to monitor what's going on in California or states that you're aware of in the District of Columbia and so forth. So I just want to kind of draw your attention to this website because it allows us to kind of really dig down in terms of what's going on here. Again, it's the Avalair Health website, which explains kind of this expiration of tax credits and allows us to kind of really dig in here. All right. So as we look at all of these concerns kind of moving forward, I want to be sure to get to some of your questions. I want to point again to those ideas of polarization, misinformation, disinformation, and extremism. So I've tried to put forward also some websites and some places where you can go look for what to pay attention to as we look at these issues, particularly around healthcare and immigration. And this is where our role for the league, I think, is very valuable, right? Often talk about and engage in partnerships with the league and with our educational institutions. We talk about legislative reforms, but our role here really is to increase awareness and civic engagement. So I think one of the values of this is as you look at your fall kickoff and what to do, one of the elements is getting information out there for where people can make their own assessment about what's going on, particularly in the wake of the passage of this OBBBA. So that means that we have to do a lot of things about education and continue our partnerships, our community involvement and transparency, which are all involved with. And one way to do that are to go to these places. And so I put in some information here that can allow us to deal with disinformation, misinformation, and other places. There are too many Substacks to list all of them, but what I wanted to point out to you are a couple of different elements here. One is Charles Gava, who does a lot of things on the impact of specific Medicaid cuts and eligibility of populations, and he posts several times a week on his Substack, and it's very helpful. So you could click on this, subscribe to his Substack. Same thing with my colleague Seth Maskett, a political scientist who does a lot of interaction on policy and politics and political science. He's not a pointy-headed academic. He's someone who's very practical. Matthew Iglesias doing similar things on the interaction between immigration and healthcare access. And if you really want to dig deep on immigration and to understand what's happening in immigration across the country and the immigration incarceration industry, what Austin Kocher at Syracuse calls it, you can attach to his Substack there as well. His Substack is phenomenal. He's just released a book about the immigration incarceration industry, the private funding, if you will, of things like the alligator Alcatraz in Florida and what that looks like. And then there are additional sources that I thought would be helpful for you that are a little bit different than what we have above in those Substacks. Andrew Donahue is an investigative editor who's concentrating on the impact of the big, beautiful bill on healthcare, immigration, and undocumented populations at Cal Matters. You can find out about him in that link. And if you're interested in some of these issues around disinformation and misinformation, you can look at a comparative perspective at the Disinfo Update or the Information Laundromat. If you haven't used this, I use this in class all the time. If you want to know what's going on with misinformation websites related to Russian propaganda and so forth, you can go to the Information Laundromat or a NewsGuard. NewsGuard is similar to kind of a fact-checking component. And then finally, with all of this, the Kaiser Family Foundation provides daily and weekly updates. And if you're not in KFF in terms of their news coverage, they have a dedicated team that's researching all of these issues and diving deeply, for example, into healthcare access and the impact of the big, beautiful bill, particularly here in California and what's moving on. So let me kind of stop with that, but just give you an idea that there's lots of elements in this particular talk for you to look at and do some of your own research to provide this kind of vigilant guideposts for what to pay attention to moving forward. I kind of concentrated on healthcare here in this talk, but there's so many elements to look at, and they're obviously dovetail with a lot of issues like, for example, immigration. Karen, let me stop there.
Okay, thanks, David.
Of course.
I did want to mention that we will be sending the slides out and hopefully posting them on our website, so that you can click on the links and dive deeper. In the meantime, we do have some questions. And just a reminder, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. The first question, which is something that I think is on everybody's mind, is Prop 50.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about the pros and cons of Prop 50 and what the controversy is about that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Sure, happy to do that. All right, so I'm going to give you some elements of the campaign and Prop 50 and some things to pay attention to that we know about ballot measures when they get on the ballot. When ballot measures get on the ballot, no money tends to be more powerful than yes money. It's easier to stop things than to pass things. But this particular ballot measure, or ballot measures that deal with political reform issues, things that the league is often very interested in, start at a higher base yes vote. So not all ballot measures are the same, if you will, in terms of the power of that no. So that means that as you spend money and you spend money, that at some point it reaches diminishing marginal return and it doesn't produce the power of no. So at some point, there's a tipping point where each additional time I say no, 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 it doesn't produce one whole vote and produces, the more I say no, the less likely it produces one whole vote. The ratio for that is typically 2.5 times the no side to the yes side. So as I spend $100 million on the yes side, which was about roughly the budget that the Newsom / Democratic team started out with, you have to spend $250 million, $300 million. So 2.5, 3 to 1. Now at 250 million plus 100 million, or 300 million plus 100 million, at that number, it would be the most expensive ballot measure in the history of ballot measures, in the history of all ballot measures. And it looks like while campaign spending has slowed a little bit, even though it's been rigorous, it's slowed a little bit the last week or so because we monitor this. It still looks like it has the potential to be record setting being Prop 22. So the buildup is great. We expect this ballot measure to be over $350 million. That's about $100 million more than Proposition 22. That's before you get to the administration of the election. If you look at the pros and cons, this gets very difficult for some place like the League or for Common Cause, because groups like this have been for citizen redistricting commissions, for transparency, for disclosure, for educating the public in terms of solutions. And we expect all of that to fall by the wayside here in terms of the campaign. And what I mean by that is, if California were to pass this measure, and the tracking polling that we've seen internally, I get polling data from both the yes side and the no side. As we look at that, we see that they've been tracking above 50%, because they started about 47 or 48%, all things being equal. So if they spend $150 million, they're forcing the opposition to spend 2.5, 3 times that. So your airwaves and your mailboxes are about to be inundated. The smart, that's correct. Yeah, thank you, Lynn. The smart money, if you're on the no side, is to slow down your campaign spending and save it for the constitutional challenge after the election. So the big thing I want to point out to you is that this looks like it's tracking to pass. But the no side money, which has the most galactic egos in politics in the world, you have Donald Trump and his $1 billion. You have Kevin McCarthy and the potential to raise $250 million. You have Charlie Munger, who has the potential to raise $100 to $200 million in his network. You have Jessica Milan Patterson from the California GOP. And you have Arnold Schwarzenegger, who won't raise any money. You take those 5 galactic egos, it's going to be hard from the no side to stay on message, despite the early ads that we see from Munger. So you slow down your money and you save it for the constitutional challenge. And what that means is that the election doesn't end on November 4th. This election continues with a constitutional challenge that ultimately ends up in the U.S. Supreme Court. And what does the Supreme Court do? Say, overturn California voters, but allow Texas voters, Indiana voters, Missouri voters, Florida voters to have their legislative process move forward? What does that look like? And potentially you have a referendum that could come back to the ballot to upset those maps next year. So the broader thing here is that this thing ain't going to end on November 4th. It's going to continue, but we can monitor the money at the end to see if the no side thinks they're going to lose, meaning the yes side it will be victorious. They save their money for the constitutional/legal challenges, which will not go to California court. They will go to federal court and end up ultimately, I think, in the Supreme Court sometime next year. So that's where I think things are headed, despite the pros and cons there about the ballot measure itself. Let me stop there, Karen, so we can get some.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So it's the biggest ticket question, and I knew it would come up, so I didn't put it in there.
Good.
And I should say that, I've talked to both sides. I've been involved with both sides in terms of their strategies, how yes strategy works versus no strategy. If you were to ask me, I think it's going to pass, but I don't think the battle is over, because I think that's going to continue through these constitutional challenges moving forward.
Thank you. So we have a question about, about the 10stepcampaign.org, which is Stacey Abrams.
Yes.
And generalstrikeus.com. And what are your thoughts on those?
Okay, so we are seeing some programs that are being developed that are more strategic and about getting new voters involved, and about looking at campaigns in a slightly different way, and having those be more global. And what I mean by that is global in terms of theme, local in terms of focus. Like, for example, Stacey Abrams' group. In the past, the targets and the voter contact have been too traditional, especially for the Democratic Party. And the example I'll give you is that I can, on my phone, with a Republican app that some of you may have heard of called WinRed, I can take a local version of WinRed in Sonoma County, and I can find out not just about frequency of voter and how they voted in the past, which is what you see, for example, the Democrats and the tool they use through PDI, Paul Mitchell's group, the one who works on redistricting. The Republican version will also give me, no one subscribes to a magazine anymore, but it can give me their magazine and their newspaper subscriptions. It can give me some consumer behavior descriptions. It can tell me about those voters who are Republican identifiers as people. So I can go to certain places and have a conversation about who they're listening to, who they're subscribing to. That's on my phone and that voter contact data. Democrats don't have that in California. And until we start to see some of these groups that are working nationally that do a better job targeting of those voters, I think you're going to continue to see an undersampling and underpolling of the support that folks who have the better tool are using. So that WinRed tool is really, really powerful in terms of its ability to talk to voters about who they are as people, not just about the political issues. And Democrats and Democratic groups are still using older targeting kind of data. And I think until they catch up with that, I think they're still going to be a little bit behind the curve. And we're going to also undersample those voters that are supportive. The example I'll give you is that in Reno, independent, infrequent voters are red-leaning, Republican-leaning. And Democrats often talk to those voters because they see them as targets around issues of reproductive rights, political access, the Supreme Court, these types of things. But they're talking to the wrong set of voters. It is reverse outside in the outskirts of Las Vegas. And that's where different tools, just using Nevada as an example, can provide different outcomes for each of the party's fortunes. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. What options does the state of California have to save or raise funds to cover the increased healthcare costs other than raising income tax?
Robin, is this your question?
It is Robin's question.
Excellent, excellent. I thought it might be. Hi, nice to see you. Okay, they're looking at a couple of things. One is healthcare district assessed costs, increasing the costs a little bit on healthcare districts. This is particularly a problem for rural districts. They're looking for some type of assessment, additional assessment to recoup into a pool. For this, there is no discussion of changes in the corporate income tax structure, and there are worries about creating additional pots of money that would place a larger burden on counties. So the broader component, to kind of answer your question, is that the belief is the California economy is going to pull back a little bit this next year. That's going to create a gap or deficit, which is going to place more pressures on counties. And that likelihood of a newer or different transition where counties have to pay more or be more involved looks to be the future under this big, beautiful bill. So I don't have good news for you there, but in the sense is that the burden is going to be borne more on counties. And I would argue to you, counties are not in that position. And as a result, that means that you're going to have a different change for nonprofits. The burden is going to increase on them. So I guess the good news is nonprofits are going to become more important. The bad news is they don't have the ability to pick that up. So services are going to have to change in that regard. So yeah, there are people trying to become innovative in Sacramento about how we're going to deal with basically a healthcare surcharge to cover some of these lapses in coverage, especially by our older, most vulnerable populations moving forward. That's the real acute problem.
Interesting. So you talked a little bit about ways that farmers could be affected. And can you talk a little more about that, about with healthcare cuts, ag cutbacks, environmental cuts, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the big beautiful bill and its real impact, it hits a number of core constituencies, not just Democratic constituencies. It's a number of core constituencies that Republicans have been very successful with, like, for example, farms and big ag, if you will, across the country. The subsidies that I talked about are the protections, like, for example, dairy market protections, crop insurance, those types of things, that $59 billion, I think, number over 10 years, about 9 years. That number is about half what it normally would be based on current projections. It's a little more than half, but not much. So if you're in ag and you're in big ag, what you see is a problem that's going to require some additional legislation, follow-up legislation. And this is where John Thune and others have been participating in looking at that legislation to place this moving forward, not in the current government shutdown debate, but after the 118th Congress, after this current Congress into the next Congress. That means that the person who's played a central role in this has been Josh Hawley. Some of you know Josh Hawley, Republican senator from Missouri. And one area that Hawley has talked about this in a big way is on his YouTube channel, which has the second most subscribers over the last year, next to that of Pete Buttigieg. So Hawley has more subscribers on his YouTube channel than Buttigieg has, but Buttigieg has the biggest percentage increase in the last year. So Josh Hawley has talked about revisiting legislation for America's farmers that would deal with this. So it's something that was put off and is known by the industry for agriculture. And I think it's also a recipe, Karen, to answer the broader question. Environmental legislation falling by the wayside, but there's going to have to be some type of healthcare adjustment that happens because states will not be able to close the gap. Counties and nonprofits will not be able to close the gap of coverage that's out there for big states like California, but also growing states like, for example, Florida. Florida is going to have a tremendous problem here in this regard. And so there is a feeling that this will lead to subsequent legislation after the current Congress, meaning after the midterm. Thank you.
You mentioned the shutdown, possible shutdown. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what's your magic ball projection on it?
Okay, so let me back up from this. When Jimmy Kimmel is taken off the air in the first 24 hours, I thought Jimmy Kimmel would be back. Then I talked to a former Disney executive who said, no, he's toast. That thing's changed. And if you look at the shutdown, it looked like Chuck Schumer. It looked like Democrats were going to hold out for a place where that would lead to a shutdown. I don't think that's going to happen. And the reason I don't think that's going to happen is because the leader for the Republicans, Thune, came into leadership saying that you have to recognize prerogatives of the minority that Mitch McConnell never would have done. That he's doesn't want to see a shutdown and wants to get a deal if that includes some place of meeting Democrats to negotiate. Doesn't mean he gives up any room, but that he gives in a place where they can negotiate so they can at least be talking to each other, which sets us up for a short-term measure near the deadline that goes again to about December. So I'd look for something that doesn't lead to a shutdown, and I'd look for something that is more short-term than longer-term, because Thune doesn't believe he can get to a place where he can negotiate with the other side and produce a bill that is longer-term. So that's the scenario I would look for.
And do you think the impacts of the big, beautiful bill that affect people will actually change people's votes for
Does
those
policy
who voted
matter?
for the current administration?
So that's a fantastic question. This is a really difficult thing to predict. Tried to give you some guideposts for how this is going to impact really vulnerable older populations in Sonoma County and in California. And then this is going to be on the legislature and the next governor to fix. We start to see some impacts of that next year, but the current governor is looking at the White House, so there's a lot of worries that he's looking past California and what's going on. But does that have impact in places that can change the map? And if you look at the Senate, that's a really hard place to where people might be seeing differences or changes in their lives and their communities. But will it matter at the ballot box in Ohio or Florida or Indiana or Michigan or the battleground states that we usually look at? For Democrats to take the Senate, they're going to have to flip 3 or 4 states that Donald Trump won. Not by big margins, but so that is unlikely. And the bad news I may have for people who want see that happen is that it doesn't look like that's going to happen for a couple cycles. So the House is where all the action is at. And the belief is that in the House, there are about 47 swing districts. That's all. That number varies by 40, 41, by some estimates 47, but there's less than 50 swing districts. So if you can concentrate in those, thank you very much, Sue. That's excellent. That's excellent. My former Disney executive said it ain't happening. So that'd be great. Let's see how long this goes. I hope he stays on. My ode to the Smothers Brothers there. Anyway, but the argument is that if you're concentrating on these 40 to 50 swing districts, if you can flip 2/3 of those, you could have a wave election that's about a net of between 20 to 25 seats, and that constitutes a wave. The likelihood of that, looking at our projections and our models mathematically, is still less than 50%. So I'm not sure that we see that wave. I'm just trying to do it as a data analyst. But what we will see is record-setting dollars as a result. So thank you. And welcome back, Jimmy. Thanks for that, Sid.
So if for those of you who didn't see it in the chat, then the news that David was referring to is that Jimmy Kimmel will be back tomorrow. So one last question we have, and that has to do with the local impact of the Bureau of Labor Statistic consumer expenditure info being postponed. Will there be a local impact that you're aware of?
Great question. Yeah, I talked to my colleague Rob Eiler this weekend, and a couple of other local economists, including some former students that are involved, graduate students that are involved with collection, and they're continuing their data collection efforts, and they're looking for alternative places to report that data. So the impact that we're seeing is that there are people locally and in the region, in the North Coast region, that are looking for places and ways to out the data for what's going on for the true picture. And the reason is there's a lot of support for this, especially among the finance industry, for what's really happening, for the car, the auto industry, for banking, for healthcare, for some real access here. And I've seen and had conversations with some of these leaders, including at Provident Health, including at Kaiser, including at Sutter, about getting real data for what is happening in the job market to make predictions for liability concerns and interests there. So I think we will see some impact on what is reported outside or come through non-traditional means. And I've tried to talk to these individuals about setting up some type of Substack or other avenue where we could report things that aren't reported, or what's missing from the data officially, without people being able to do this anonymously with some reliability. So I think that's kind of where we're headed in terms of that. So pay attention, stay close to that, because we're working on it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Farron. Thank you very much. That's a great question.
So thank you, David, as usual, for your wealth of information and very timely. And do you have any last words of wisdom for us before we sign off?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to get down about politics and what's going on, and about public policy. And I really appreciate what the league does, what all of you do, and I don't think we need to be in that deep, dark space. Comedy, arts, culture, there's so many things that this county, this area brings with an enlightened group like yourself, and we're doing really amazing work. You all are doing really amazing work, and I'm 100% with you, and we can bring young people along in that regard. So I just want to let you all know what a pleasure it is to work with you.
Well, back to you, David, also.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.